What's up, everybody? How you doing? Theo here on Amateur Sports TV. Today, we've got a fantastic guest for our ASTV Sports Show. None other than one of the greatest callers that I've worked with personally, a man that has a breadth of knowledge about all sports. He is truly a master of his trade, continuing to get better day by day. Great connections all over this country with regards to professional hockey and coaches. He has rubbed elbows and shaken hands before this pandemic with people including Dennis Bayak, Barry Trotz, just to name a few. He is the voice of the Dauphin Kings of the Manitoba Junior Hockey League and the sports director for 730 CKD. I'm a good friend of mine, an old classmate of mine, Mr. Darnell Duff. He's going to join us on the ASTV Sports Show right now. As promised, we have Mr. Darnell Duff. How are you, Darnell? How's things going today? How's the golf game? I know you're busy on Mondays. I don't want to bug you, but I know the golf game is a work in progress, correct?
Golf game is a work in progress, Theo. I go out there, I have some fun with the boys, a couple of men's nights a week, but I have fun. That's the most important part. Don't make too many birdies, but I really do appreciate you having me on the show today. I know you were mentioning ex-classmates, and it feels like it's been a long time since we were back at Herzing College, but no doubt those are memorable days, and I'm really looking forward to joining the show today.
Shout out to Bev Edmondson, our fantastic, fearless leader back in the day, and the wonderful the sports banters we shared in our young careers and where we've gone to today and what we're doing. I mean, you've made the step to go to Dauphin, Manitoba. You've rubbed some pretty cool shoulders and some pretty good elbow and fist pumps with Barry Trotz. I know you've interviewed and talked with him about his successes as a tremendous coach in the NHL, as well as Dennis Bayak. You and I both have been able to share some time with him over the last couple of years. Where did your passion for sports broadcasting come from, Darnell, and why did you pursue this career?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and I think a lot of people ask that. I think the passion, it really grows from my brothers were big into sports. Growing up, they played pretty much every sport you could have. And I would just go to hockey games. I would go to volleyball games. I would go to basketball games, talk to the coaches. I was the water boy for a couple of years. And then probably 6 or 7 years ago or 8 years ago, my partner's brother was playing AAA hockey. And I would stand behind the glass and, do play-by-play. And I just, ever since, it feels like day one, obviously not day one, but it's been so long that sports has been ingrained in my blood, and the passion just continues to grow. Like, people talk about having a job and that sorts of thing. I don't classify what I do as a job. I classify it as a career, and it's just something I love doing. Like being up in the broadcast booth, there's no better feeling in the world than calling. I called a double overtime goal in against the Portage Terriers before the season was, cut short in March, which was a heartbreak, of course, but still. No better feeling than that. I get to show my raw emotion, and I think if you listen to how I broadcast a hockey game, you'll see how passionate I truly am about this sport. But as you mentioned, I've had the chance to rub handshakes, of course, before this whole pandemic went on with NHL coaches Barry Trotz, Ryan Pollock, an NHL player for the Islanders, Jace Howrluck with the Ottawa Senators, Dennis Bayak, always a mentor for me, the voice of the Winnipeg Jets. So it's been a fun ride. It hasn't been a long ride by any means. We look it down. I've been a Dauphin now for 3 years. Last week, actually, or 2 weeks ago, was my 3-year anniversary. I've been in Fort McMurray, Flin Flon, Winnipeg, Toronto down the road. But it's been a memorable journey so far, and I guess I'm just lucky to be able to chat about it at the end of the day.
Absolutely love it, and you love to chat about it. A passion, a career. You and I always have fun. This has never been something where you call it a grind. We're upset to put the work boots on. This is something we get to enjoy and tell. Enough about us. Let's get to the crux of this matter, because you and I, we have a huge affinity towards hockey. Cut short, seasons, championships not played in March and April. The bubbles are now being produced. They're being formed. Let's talk about what it means for junior hockey, first and foremost, to have a bit of a schedule, maybe coming back in the fall. What does that mean to a town like Dauphin, for one? And what does that mean for the players and the coaches looking for that potential return to play?
So this is rather honestly a long process and probably like a 10-tiered answer, because first of all, you look at the borders being closed. You look at these leagues, Dauphin Kings, more than a handful of American players every single year. No word on when the borders are going to be open. So if those American players can't come, that's just going to change the aspect and how you create a team. Not that you can't create a team, but it's going to change it because so many American players love coming north of the border to play junior hockey. And then you talk about the bubble with the NHL. That's something that professional leagues can do because they have lucrative broadcasting deals. That's not something the Manitoba Junior Hockey League can do. They can't have a bubble. They need fans in the stands. They need mass gatherings to be allowed. Now, the MJHL has said they want to start the season next season on September 25th, which is a Friday, which is on par with where they start every single year. Pre-pandemic, they would have started on Friday, September 25th. The WHL, Western Hockey League, of course, the Brandon Wheat Kings, Winnipeg Ice, said they want to start on October 2nd. Ron Robison, the commissioner of the WHL, has said we need at least 50% of the capacity to be allowed in WHL rinks to even have a chance to make the season feasible. Like I said, they want to start on October 2nd. They have all these projection dates when they want to start. I don't think the picture is that clear. I like to be positive, but I'm still a little bit on the downside. I don't see mass gatherings being allowed, within the near future for sure until we get a vaccine. And if there's no fans in the stands, there's no junior hockey in my mind. You need fans in the stands. That's the main revenue point. You can't play in empty arenas. And I know that's tough news for just about anybody who's a big-time hockey fan. But this return to play protocol they have is all fantastic. Huge documents, a lot of excitement around that. And you think, yes, we're going to be coming back for sure on September 25th. That's just a projection date. I for sure hope it's September 25th because I want to get back up in the booth, just as do every other broadcaster really across North America in junior hockey leagues. But I just don't think it's as easy as that. It's going to be a long process. Of course, we see bars opening, restaurants opening, that sorts of thing. Manitoba's in a wonderful place with, less than 350 cases since March. And, we had a stretch there where 8 days in a row with no cases. That is fantastic to hear. And, the restrictions are easing, but still, you're not seeing any mass gatherings. Still outdoors, I think you were only allowed to gather with 100 people or something. So that's just not going to facilitate how a junior hockey team is able to run. And the border, of course, has another issue. But I think if the borders stay closed, you could still, put a team together, of course, with just Canadian players, as long as you can actually get on the ice. But I know the MJHL has just said they're going to allow teams to resume their summer activities. Now they're hosting a prospect development camp coming up later this month. So they have all sorts of plans and all sorts of projections to get ahead to the 2020-2021 season. But I don't think it's cut and dry as maybe many people think.
You bring up a really important point, Darnell, and that's the border crossings. And it's a league, and I've talked to Sean Mullen about the same topic. When you talk about having your control of your own destiny, and you really don't, because like you said, Dauphin has a team where it's 20 to 25% potentially American-born players that can't cross the border. Or if you have players from provinces that need to be in a quarantine scenario, like Quebec and Ontario, Eastern Ontario, you're now facing dilemmas where junior hockey may have to have a bit of a, not an asterisk to the season, but may look at strictly having Manitoba or more Manitoba players on their teams and on their rosters. I found this stat truly amazing over the last 2 years, Darnell, and you can talk to me about this one as well. When you talk about Winnipeg being like the capital city of Manitoba, the largest amount of AAA hockey players that potentially could make the next jump to the MJ, yet you only see, I think there were 30 or 28 or 30 Winnipeg-born players outside of the Winnipeg Blues program that were from Winnipeg. Now, does that strike you as odd, or does that strike you the fact that Winnipeg talent is just finding elsewhere to go?
That's a tough question because it's based on the program. The Winnipeg Blues in the past have been a team that has been historically Winnipeg players, with not a lot of. Look at their roster this past year, 75-80% more was Winnipeg players, but it's a young program. So a lot of players who are from Winnipeg, if you're top end talent, you don't necessarily want to be on a team that is perhaps rebuilding. Like the Winnipeg Blues have gone out and said, they've made it public that they're not a team that is maybe going to be a championship team year after year. They're a team that perhaps will squeak into the playoffs as they did this past season when they took on the Steinbach Pistons and lost in 4 straight games. And if you don't remember, they lost a triple overtime game in that season. They also had Michael Sartor, who was the leading scorer in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, the runner-up for the most valuable player. But they are a rebuilding team. Some players don't want to play in that aspect, specifically when you only have 3 or 4 years of junior A eligibility from, of course, your 17-year-old season, perhaps even 16 if you're an exceptional player, up until your 20-year-old season. You don't want to wait around, stick around for 2 or 3 years waiting for a rebuild. And then in your 20-year-old season, perhaps, go to another team who's contending for a championship. You want to get straight to the championship vibe. So I think for Winnipeg, they're doing a good job as far as, of course, they just moved to the rink training center. They have fantastic workout trainings, workouts. Gord Burnett, actually the head coach this past season, just signed a contract, an assistant coach with the Moose Jaw Warriors. So yeah. I think the Blues are setting a nice little foundation for them. They're probably not a championship team anytime in the future, but they're a team that works hard. They're young. They're developing their players, and I think that's the most important thing about junior hockey. Championships are nice. Of course, I want to broadcast a championship player, but it's nice to see these young men move on and play college hockey in the future. And I think that's the most important thing.
And you just touched on the double-edged sword there, Darnell, because as a player, you want to progress and you want to develop. But as a player as well, you want to put the ring on the finger and you want to hoist the championship. How do you build? I mean, there's obviously so many different ways you can build a culture and a tradition. I mean, over the last decade, the Portage Terriers have been a fantastic team. The Steinbach Pistons are finally being that challenge to the Terriers. We're starting to see teams develop that tradition, that breadth of excellence through, building teams. How do you explain, you have an early or a young team, and then you see them playing a very veteran-style team like a Terriers, and there's simply no chance for the David to take out the Goliath kind of thing. Explain that type of culture as a player, as someone who broadcasts it, and what do you see on the ice between certain teams here in Manitoba?
Well, I think the funniest thing is you go into these games, some teams, like as you mentioned, on paper don't have a chance because of just the roster. You're putting a team with 17, 18-year-olds against a team with 20-year-olds. Now, the MJHL has gone down. Now you're only going to be allowed 6 20-year-olds, which I think is kind of nifty in the aspect of they're trying to keep this league as a more junior league. And, of course, 20 is junior, but, a younger league where you're having those 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. You're still allowed 6 20-year-olds, but you mentioned that David and Goliath. In the MJHL in the past years, we haven't seen that too many upsets. I mean, perhaps the Dauphin Kings would have upset the Terriers this season had the series gone on. Like, they were coming off a double overtime win. Who would have known what would have happened? But the parity in the league, though, is starting to, intensify every year. You look at 4 or 5 years ago, the MJHL, as you mentioned, it's been run by the Terriers for a long time. Let's be, straight to the point. The Steinbach Pistons won a league championship a couple of years ago, and they're contenders every single year. But Blake Spiller has done a fantastic job with Portage overall. But I just think there's so many good players these days. There are so many good players around the country and even south of the border that want to come down to Canada. They want to, base themselves in one of the 11 member clubs, whether that be Neepawa to Dauphin to Winnipeg to Portage to Steinbach. They want to base themselves, and that's really helping the league. I think Kim Davis has done a fantastic job. He just retired as the commissioner of the MJHL earlier this month. Back on July 1st was last day after 18 years. I think he's done a wonderful job of growing this league. Still has some way to go as far as, the difference between 11th place team and a first place team is really astronomical. astronomical. Like you go from the Nipawin natives, who over the past 4 years have less than, or the past 3 years rather, have less than 40 wins. And then you go to the top team, the Steinbach Pistons appear to get, 35 to 40 wins every single year. So it's a pretty drastic change from 11 to 1, but still, I think the league is, in a pretty good spot right now. As far as developing players, moving players to the next level. Grady Hobbs, King, he's committed to play at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, coming up, and that's a Division I college. Of course, it's in the States, and knows if the borders are going to be open. I guess speaking of that, as I sort of ramble on here, but speaking of those borders closing, Reese Gaber from Gilbert Plains, Manitoba, he's committed to play for the North Dakota Hawks. That's NCAA, one of the powerhouses. They were projected to win the Frozen Four this past season before everything was shut down. And he sort of had the thought process was, I'm going to be essential because I'm moving there. He was supposed to report back on June 20th. He went to the border. They said no, he had to turn back. So that's another interesting, I guess, tangible that we have to look at as well.
Absolutely. We're going to come right back with Darnell. We'll take a quick break. We're going to talk about the MJ as well as junior hockey in Manitoba and the next level. Plus, we're going to talk about blowing some bubbles. We'll be right back here on the ASTV Sports Show. Darnell Duff joins me here on the ASTV Sports Show. Darnell, we talked about the MJ being the level of play that goes from AAA to the next level. Let's talk about the next level to that and the WHL and whatnot for progression of play. Why is it that Manitoba as a province, maybe not the MJ product, but Manitoba as a province is always 4th out of 4 when it comes to Western Hockey League draft rankings?
Yeah, that really is a good question, Theo. I'm not.
Are we
sure
not promoting players?
answer.
Are we not? I mean, Kevin Surratt is the new head of the MJ, and I'm not saying it's all, it's not all on the product, but I look at how Winnipeg develops players, and are we promoting the player? Are we missing a step? What are we not doing so well that Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia are doing? Is it the numbers? Is it a numbers game? I don't know the answer. I wanted to just know if you could shed maybe a quick minute of light on that.
I think it's the perception. I think this is an issue that is underlying, that is, decades old. I think, you look 50 and 20 years ago, it was all Manitoba. Like I chatted with Kim Davis. He said at the start of his tenure, the MJHL was a bush league, for the lack of better terms. It really was. Nobody was thinking about the MJHL. The players weren't wanting to stay in Manitoba. The top players were moving out to the coast. Of course, the BCHL is always known year after year as the best league. Saskatchewan's known as a better league. Alberta. People were wanting to move away from Manitoba, and I think that's just because the competition wasn't here. The coaches weren't here, and I don't think the commitment to the organizations were here. And I think over the years, the perception has changed, where Manitoba is starting to, get a little bit of ahead of the game. Still maybe behind the BCs, the Albertas, and the Saskatchewans. Although if you look at recent results, Manitoba is edging the Portage Terriers. Back in 2015, won the championship at the Nationals. The Steinbach Pistons advanced. They beat Saskatchewan, and they advanced to the national championship. I think it's been a decades-long thing where Manitoba, about 20 years ago, hockey was, although we say, hockey is Canada's game, Manitoba was so far behind the pack But as the years have gone on, the work has gone. I think there's better scouts around now. There's people who are putting more effort into it. And I think these young kids, they need to realize that, or they want these scouts and these coaches to buy into them completely 100%. And if they're not going to get it here, they're going to go somewhere else. And unfortunately, that somewhere else is outside of Manitoba, which has drastically hurt Manitoba, and it still is. A couple players, the Kings this past season, were trying to lock up. They went to the Alberta Junior Hockey League because they just felt they had a better opportunity there. That continues to hurt the Kings. But the Kings did get Caden Bryant back from the AJHL, so obviously they were saying the right things. It's all about perception, and this long-lasting issue that has hurt the Prairie Province, specifically Manitoba, over the years. It's starting to get better, but still definitely do have some ways to go.
I'm going to ask you one more question about progression before we move on to Bubbles. Do you think the age of 15 is too young for a draft?
100%.
I mean, I look at 15 years old, and you've maybe gone through one growth spurt in your life.
Yeah,
you're just hitting your second one. I mean, you're drafting on the what if and the opportunity and the potential versus the kinetic.
Absolutely, 100%. 15 is just a little bit too young, and even these exceptional player statuses you're seeing lately, of course, Matthews, like these 15 is 100%, as you mentioned, too young. These kids, and they're not at the same IQ as players that are 17, 18, 19. You can't expect a 15-year-old to have the same thought process and as an 18 or 19-year-old. You just can't. I don't see why 15 is an advantage to draft at that age. I understand you're talking about, of course, making these kids happy as they're young players. Braden Doobie was drafted by the Seattle Thunderbirds, top 30 in this past year's WHL Bantam draft. He has super high thoughts about him. He's supposed to be an excellent, excellent player. And at the Bantam age level, he was excellent, but let's not forget he wasn't playing against guys who are bigger, more skilled, and have higher IQ than him.
You mentioned IQ, Darnell. You mentioned the word supposed to be, or the phrase supposed to be, the what if, the massive question mark. As much as you look at the play on the ice and how the goals, assists, the PIMs, the save percentages, all those analytics put it together, what does it do to a player or a parent's psyche when they see or they don't see their son drafted in the place they're supposed to be? Does that not do more detrimental things at a kid who's just getting into their teenage years? Or does that set them up for success? And if they don't reach that pedestal, something's going to happen.
Now, I think as my years of reporting, of course, young players throughout the day, I think the most cliche, the answer I get the most when I talk to them about getting drafted. And obviously, congratulations to these young kids. They've worked hard. They deserve everything that they're going to get if they continue to work hard. But they say, well, this is just the beginning. And that's an answer that I hear countless time after time after time. And sure, getting drafted is the beginning, but I think you mentioned that psyche. What can it do to a player? It can do two things. It can absolutely destroy a guy who gets too high because they've been drafted theoretically, let's say, 4th, 5th overall, even 30th overall when they thought they were going to be in the second round. It can destroy a player, or we look on the other side, it could fuel them to become a player who what they're expected from them. Because once you get drafted, the expectations before you were drafted were high. And then once you get drafted, the expectations are even higher, man. Like, you're not given anything in this world. There are so many great players, especially when you move into the major junior levels, when you're going to be playing with the Brandon Wheat Kings, Winnipeg Ice, when you have players from overseas coming over. There's a lot of good guys to compete with. So, of course, yes, day one is after you get drafted. But if you weren't putting in the work before you were getting drafted, really day one starts years and years and years before you get drafted. So in long terms, I guess it can hurt a person if you get a little bit complacent. You think, well, I got drafted, I'm good to go. They obviously see something in me. Yes, they saw something in you as a 14-year-old playing against 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. They didn't see something in you playing against 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. That's what you have to prove, and you have to show in the years to come.
Gone are the days of seeing 99 as a 17-year-old light it up in a global challenge in 1979 when he was first drafted by the Oilers. You're now talking about, like you said, 14 and 15-year-olds reigning supreme on inferior talents that they're playing, and they're being drafted based on potential. It is the hard work. It's not the beginning. It's you see players, male and female, who have that drive and that support staff that will get them moving and get them going to the next level. It's those that are saying, well, this is the beginning. What have you been doing your whole hockey career before this? Because that's not the beginning. This is the part of the dash of your hockey career where you've been given an opportunity, and what you do with it is up to you.
Absolutely.
So let's talk some bubbles. I know I like blowing bubbles. You like blowing bubbles.
I've been blowing bubbles my whole life.
Always. I love blowing them. My kid loves them too. The NHL has already paid its players, so the bubble doesn't affect, in terms of money and revenue, all that. Of course, they would love to see fans in the stands. What is your major concern with the four sports moving forward and the bubbles that they're creating in terms of player safety? And regardless of, we're still going to watch it on TV if it actually happens, but player safety has always been the number one concern. Is there something that the Big Four are missing compared to what they've been able to do in the Bundesliga, in professional soccer in Europe? What are they doing different, or what are they missing?
Well, I think the big answer here is what happens. They have these bubbles set up, and they say how they're going to be, so amazing. What happens if you get infected inside the bubble? It's going to be a domino effect.
Potentially, yeah.
I saw just probably last week, 5% of NHL players only were tested positive, which is, a pretty solid stat. And there was 35. And the question was there, well, how many infections does there have to be for us to, take a stop and say this isn't going to happen? But Adam Silver has said, I'm worried that if someone gets infected in here, we're going to have to make another work stoppage. And I just don't understand. I don't see how it's possible. Like, you look at the MLS, Major League Soccer, a team just had to drop out because 10 of their players tested positive for the coronavirus when they arrived.
Nashville, yeah, it's very disheartening. I mean, they think that the solution is basically, okay, let's get all these players into the bubble and then we'll deal with them from there. Because once they're in, we can quarantine them, we can isolate them, we can do what we want within our own confines. It's the outside world that we're removing these players from. So it gives them an opportunity to self-police, self-health, self-aware, and educate these players to know, okay, if you do come across something, this is what you have to do, and also continue to do things with a sense of common sense. Because that's really what it boils down to. I mean, I look at teams like hub cities, like Edmonton and Toronto, for example, for the NHL. There's going to be, and the Jets just recently opening up their player facility for phase 2 to start their training camps. Training camps are starting. There's schedules set in place that isolation question is so huge, Darnell.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the NHL went a good route by choosing Winnipeg, not Winnipeg, Edmonton and Toronto as I know they were as hub cities. I know they were talking about Vegas, but the States right now is an absolute disaster when it comes to COVID-19. So then you switch over to the NBA, and they're going to Orlando. And you looked in Florida not too long ago; they had 40,000 cases in what was it, 1 or 2 day period.
Everyone was at the beach.
But you have to allow these players. You talk about the bubble and them being inside their hotel rooms and whatnot. You have to let them go out. They're going to go out. They're going to go out for dinner. They're going to, go play around the golf. Golf is, I believe, is a safe sport to be playing, of course, because you can social distance. But they're going to go out. They're adults. They're professional athletes. They're going to want to explore a little bit, and maybe not as much as they would pre-pandemic. But still, I just don't understand how they plan on keeping these players 100% safe. And my big worry, is one guy gets it on a team, doesn't know about it, passes it off to another, and then all of a sudden 20 players on a team have it, and the sports world shuts down once again. I think that's what, as much as I hate to say it, I think that's what this whole thing is leading up to, because I've seen some of their plans on what they're going to be allowing the athletes to do, at least in the NHL. which is in a good spot because Canada overall is doing good. However, Ontario is struggling, and with Toronto being a hub city. But in the NBA, if you let these guys go out to restaurants, if you let them go to the golf courses, and we've seen what COVID can do, it may not affect these professional athletes, and it probably shouldn't because they're in peak shape, but it spreads like wildfire, like absolute crazy person to person. And I'm very worried that that's going to be the issue coming up here when professional leagues start in the better part of 2 weeks.
Exactly. The delayed onset of this pandemic and these infections is the worrisome. It's the unknown, and being tested 2 or 3 times a week. And we've heard some Major League Baseball players that have been tested once in a 9-day period, which is not part of their protocol. So there are definitely steps being missed with other leagues, but we will wait and see what happens here in the beginning of August or beginning of July, middle of July, into the beginning of August with these games. Last question before I say goodbye, Darnell. What are your thoughts? I mean, you and I have put out a couple of YouTube videos before, and I guess Bryson DeChambeau has found our videos and seen our physique as being the positivity of our longest drive competitions. The kid's got bombs. Like, he's out driving people. He put on a little bit of weight, and the weight he put on didn't go to his ego, but it went to his driver and the rest of his clubs. He's hitting bombs that are so far. Some cars need gallons of gas to drive that far. It's insane.
Right. Bryson, I love golf. It's probably one of my favorite sports to watch on TV. So I love that it is back, and it's been fun watching Bryson DeChambeau. As you mentioned, he put on 20 pounds of muscle. Like, if you look at his diet, what he's eating every day, you'd probably cry because the amount of food he's eating, what he's doing in the gym. And I think the coolest thing about Bryson DeChambeau is the clubs he's using. Every single one is the same length, 37.5 inches. You go from the 9-iron down to the 4-iron. Usually the 4-iron would be much longer. That's not the case for Bryson DeChambeau, and his drives are just absolutely incredible. And the other day, last week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic, of course, which he won his 6th PGA Tour of win in his history, and I think there's going to be a lot more for Bryson DeChambeau. He hit an 8-iron from the rough, 230 yards to 22 feet away from the pin. That should not happen. Bryson DeChambeau is an absolute specimen. I know a lot of people are criticizing him. I don't know how you criticize a man who has forged his own way in golf. He wants to be different than other golfers. He worked out in the gym. Now he's going on the golf course. He's making a difference. He's winning tournaments. He's winning millions of dollars. And, everybody talks about his attitude. He's got slow play. The guy can golf. He can mash a ball. And he brings viewers in. If you're not a big golf fan, but you like to watch people golf, and if you're not a big golf fan and you like to watch, but maybe you like the World Long Drive Tour, you want to watch Bryson DeChambeau because that guy can hit a ball far. He hits it straight. He's accurate. He can putt well. The guy is he's a stud, and it's fun to watch him. Of course, I love Tiger Woods, who seems to never play, of course, with his back, and he's, very understandable, and he knows that he can only play a few events here every few months leading up to the Masters coming up in November. But I tell you, Bryson DeChambeau is a young kid, and he is incredible. I actually read a story about him when he was 16. He was playing on Team USA in a junior event over in Japan. He shot a 10 under 61 to lift Team USA to the championship. That doesn't happen unless you know how to golf. Of course, he's been good over his career. He's won 5 events before this Rocket Mortgage Classic, but now he's really paved his way, and he's changed how the game is played, and it's definitely benefiting him.
No, he's had, I think this is now 7 or 8 top 10 finishes in this past 15 rounds or 15 tournaments. We don't hear the names of Spieth or Koepka or Johnson right now. It's all about DeChambeau. I think people just like to hear it, and they want to see what he's eating the next day, which is pretty impressive. Darnell Duff, I want to thank you very much for joining me this fine, beautiful day. I hope everything's going well in Dauphin. I know we look forward to see the return of hockey. We're going to talk next month because I think there's going to be some more news regarding border openings and roster changes and amalgamations that will have to occur, and the opportunity for potentially what we're going to see in terms of how to bring your roster to its full capabilities with the with the limitations that might still be in place. So, Darnell, I want to thank you very much for joining me. very much. Have a good day.
Theo, I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today, and I look forward to chatting next month, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. You'll find Darnell Duff on 730 CKDM in Dauphin, as well as the voice of the Kings. And hopefully we'll talk some more junior hockey soon. This has been the ASTV Sports Show with Theo and his beautiful, wonderful, fantastic, great golfer, Darnell Duff. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.